All right, here we go. Let's do this. So this week you got your one thing to do as we normally do, and let me see, make sure I got that. Pete. All right, so you're gonna be coming off the lab that you did before. So I promised you, every lab is gonna be coming off of the lab that was before it, or at least two before it, because we're gonna swap Windows, Linux, Windows, Linux, Windows, Linux. But this one, Windows Server 2016. The big thing about this is getting it installed and setting it up on a VM that it has at least these things. Otherwise, you're going to run into some real big issues about slowness, and you're going to complain to me that it's so slow. Do this. At least this. If you can afford to give it more, do, right? More RAM, more CPUs, more everything. If you can do it. Remember, the CPUs are a physical core thing. If you only have a dual core processor with hyperthreading, you still only have 2 cores. So don't oversubscribe your stuff. Otherwise, you're going to run into some issues. All right. Installing the VirtualBox guest additions. Good idea. That way everything runs a little bit smoother, a little bit faster, all that kind of good stuff. And I don't have it written down, but I implore you guys, take snapshots. This is not a picture. This is the actual snapshot feature in VirtualBox, so that when you, not if, when you destroy your VM, you'll be able to roll back. I promise you will break it. It may not be this lab, it may not be next lab, but you will, if you don't take snapshots, come up to me in a semester and say, can I have an extension because I blew up my VM? Or my VM isn't booting anymore? Or I don't know what I did to DNS, but it's not working. Or. I promise you, promise, 100%, you will blow it up. After every lab, take a snapshot. All of the VMs. It's going to take a little bit of disk space. All your snapshots together probably won't take more than 10, 20 gigs. So dedicate that space on your disk. Otherwise, you're going to have a really bad time. Because what happens if we're in like the 10th week, we're 6 Windows labs in, and you blow up your VM? Guess how many labs you have to go through now? 6. Again, from scratch. Yeah. So don't not do it. Not doing naps? Oh, yeah. Well, that's the good way to do it. After every lab. Once you're done and you're happy with it and everything's working and pinging this and pinging that or whatever, take a snapshot. Snapshot. Not screenshot, snapshot. All right. So install Server 2016 using the whole disk. This is in Server Manager. Disks. So go to File and Storage Services, and underneath that you'll see disks. And once you highlight that, big old screen full of all the disk information is going to show up. Take a screenshot of that. That is important. I want to just verify that you got a 40 gig disk. The partitioning is not anything crazy. Then hostname. I want to see your hostname. If it's win-abc1234564145, no. Nope. Actually name your box. Name it something. Anything. I don't care. Name it Superman. Name it Batman. Name it, Name it Schism. Whatever. Kool-Aid Man, whatever. Doesn't matter to me. Name it. Statically assign the second IP address. Remember, we reserved IP addresses, right? Your router is probably the first one, though I don't necessarily care, but typically it's the first one, so .1. The second IP address, I need you to use it for this server here. So here's the thing. It's going to get a DHCP IP address. Well, let it get a DHCP IP address first. Verify what the gateway is. Verify what the DNS is. Verify all that stuff. That way, you'll have this information for when you turn off DHCP in pfSense and turn it on in Windows Server. So before you statically assign, figure it out. Figure out the information via DHCP first. Then statically assign your IP addresses. Configure your time zone. Use the command prompt to do this using tzutil. Take a screenshot of that. And then on your Windows server, install the DHCP server role. Y'all know how to do roles, right? I don't have to go through that. We're good? All right.
I need to teach me again.
I can. I'm going to have to install a Windows server first. I don't have one here. But I can. I mean, if you need me to show you some of this stuff, I totally can. I won't show you the actual configuration because y'all have gone through that already. It may have been in passing in your NDS class where you talk about it for 1 week and then you forget about it, but it's time to dig deep, reach back. Y'all still have that book probably between the three of you that are actually in this class that are physically here, and that's Anthony and Pete out there too. Between one of y'all, you have the book for that class. And in that book, it tells you how to install DHCP, tells you how to configure it, and get some basics going. Use that as a reference. We're on Windows in this one, so that'll be your NDS class. But the Linux one should have it too. However, the Linux one actually gives you a cool link that has all the cool stuff in it. All right, so install that. Highlight it in Server Manager. Show me that it's installed. Take a screenshot. Then in the DHCP server, snap in. Tools, DHCP. That's how you get there. Open that up. Create a new scope. I don't care what you name it. But whatever you had configured in pfSense, whatever range it was, write that down. Because when you're going through this scope, I want you to use the exact same range.
Which one, the 5 that we reserved or the other one?
Okay, you can do this one of two ways. So you did reserve 5, at least in your mind, you reserved 5. You can do this 2 ways in DHCP, in Windows. You can set up the scope to where it starts at the IP address of .6 and then goes on. Or you can start the IP address range at 1, use the whole network, and then go in after the fact and set up a, what do they call it in Windows Server? Where it's like a forbidden range. I forget the actual name of it. I'll have to look it up. But you can set that up where those IP addresses are off limits to anybody asking for a DHCP server range. Now, this one's actually pretty good just simply because it's self-explanatory documentation, right? You go in there, you see that forbidden set, and it's like, oh, yeah, obviously we didn't want those IP addresses to be used. There's always a description area when you're setting things like that up, and you can literally say, this is not used because, list off the name of the machines that have a static IP or something.
Now, wouldn't that mess up with the static? Because you want .2 and the reserve, no?
Because
the DHCP is automatically assigning. Okay.
Right, and it won't, whether you set them off limits or you don't even include them in the scope, it will not give out .2. And that's what your server is going to be. Yep. Set your lease time to 1 day, 24 hours. The cool thing about this is that your computers, okay, the DHCP RFC, the actual rules of DHCP say that a DHCP lease can be renewed automatically as early as halfway through your lease. So twice a day, your computer will reach out and say, hey, I still have this IP address. Is it cool if I just whole new lease, 24 hours? And the server will come back as long as it's up and say, yeah, cool, right? So the cool thing about that is that it's usually never during the workday. Your computers get turned on early, 7 o'clock. They get themselves a new lease, and it won't be until 7 o'clock later on that they renew that. So this happens just in case, like your DHCP server's down, you have a full day to get it back up before people start experiencing issues. You can push this up to 7 days, 14 days. But if you've got a really small range or just a huge amount of devices, you can run into issues where you've got DHCP exhaustion, where you've run out of IP addresses to give people. So 1 day is pretty good. That means if you exhaust by the end of the day, by tomorrow, you should be okay. Things should have flushed out and you're good. But that's the whole thing about this. 1 day might be too much and it might not be enough. And you will only know this by having experienced it wherever it is you're working. Someone that has 20 employees that they're working with versus 200 employees are going to have a different lease time. 1 day is a good starting point. Stretch or contract depending on what's best for your company. Anyway, so you just leave it at 1 day. I mean, I've seen just about everything, to be honest with you. There's no one size fits all answer to this. It is I've seen 8 hours before, and that's fine too. You know, by the end of the day, definitely everybody's flushed out, and you can start fresh the next day. And if you're already on the network, you're just going to get that same IP address over and over and over again. So it's not a big deal one way or the other. I mean, shorter leases tend to have less of an effect as long as your server stays up. They're actually pretty good for high traffic areas like here. I imagine the lease time is, I hope it's not more than a day, because people come on and off this campus all the time. All right. So set the router scope. So for some reason, Windows decides it wants to call this thing like 4 different things depending on what you're trying to do. What would I put in the router scope option? What goes there? It's going to be one single IP address. The gateway. Yep. So Windows calls it default gateway. It calls it router, and it calls it gateway. So just know that router scope option refers to the default gateway of the network. So you're going to type in the default gateway's IP. That's what goes in there. And then the DNS server scope option. So the idea with this one is that you can set up any DNS that you want. You can leave it as pfSense, so just repeat whatever was in the router scope option, or you can set up something like 8.8.8.8, 1.1.1.1, whatever you want. Doesn't matter what you use. We're gonna end up setting up our own DNS server and using it internally anyway. So for the next couple of weeks, doesn't matter what you set it to. Just set it to something so long as you have internet. Take a screenshot of all those options. Let me take a look.
Hey, is there another DNS besides like Cloudflare and Google?
There's also OpenDNS, which is it 7.7.7.7? No, it's 9.9.9.9. Yeah, 9.9.9.9. Cisco, IBM, a couple other companies back that.
The only one I remember is like Cloudflare.
Yeah, 1.1.1.1. Oh, I mean, it's easy. It's one. It's one all the way across. Well, I mean, public DNS like this didn't actually exist for a few years ago. It's actually a pretty new thing. Google started, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago or so with their 8.8.8.8, and
It's like 8.8.4.4.
yeah, as a secondary. Yeah, but before that, you didn't really do this. You had the ISP's DNS, and that was it. Or you had your own home rolled DNS. That was it. So, I mean, this public DNS thing is actually a pretty new thing. And, I mean, I don't think we've shaken all the bugs out of it. But, I mean, Google's actually really, really stable. So, you know, not mad at it. It's good. It works if you don't mind being tracked. So, anyway, add your Windows 10 VM to this network and get a DHCP IP address from your Windows server. If you're getting it from pfSense, you've done it wrong. So you need to make sure after you've turned on DHCP in Windows, after you've gotten that scope ready and it's active and good to go, turn it off in pfSense. Off. Don't like change the settings of it. Like literally turn it off. Uncheck the box that says enable and save it and verify that it's not working. How do you verify that DHCP is not working?
Test
How do you do that?
by clicking, going into your Windows VM and clicking DHCP dynamic, and then hit OK. If
Yep.
you don't get an internet connection, then
Cool.
it's not working.
Exactly. Set it to automatically configure itself, and when it doesn't get an IP address, DHCP obviously doesn't work. Perfect. All right. So verify that, then make sure it's on the Windows server. Try it again, and you should get an IP address. Give it about 15 seconds for that service to fully start. So, you know, if you do it immediately or whatever, you might fail. Just do it again if you get trigger happy on that.
And this is so that the Windows 10 pulls the IP address from Windows Server, not pfSense.
Correct. The bigger your company gets, the more likely you are to have a separate DHCP server outside of your router or IDS or whatever. But it's falling out of favor because a lot of these IDSs or a lot of these unified threat management things, routers, Sophos, the FortiGate thing, they all have it built in. They're all really good at it. So it might just be an all-in-one kind of solution. But either way, you'll need to know how DHCP works, and turning it off in one, turning it on in another really helps kind of build that understanding. So anyway, verify. If you do an I have A in there. It's supposed to be all. If you have ipconfig/all in there, then it will tell you where your DHCP information is coming from. It'll literally say your DHCP server is this IP. Verify that that IP is Windows Server. Should be .2. Then take a screenshot of all that stuff, and then in the address leases. So back on your server, go into DHCP, the snap-in, and on the left-hand side, there's going to be a leases section. Verify that your Windows 10 machine shows up. If it doesn't show up, that lease didn't, and you got a lease, that lease didn't come from your Windows server. Just to be sure, smack the F5 key a couple times. It'll refresh that window. So in case that window was open before you did all this, and then you went back to it, and you're like, it's not there, hit the refresh key. There's also a little green, like, recycle-looking icon or whatever. Click on that if you're not a fan of the F keys. Other than that, that's it. Top to bottom, install Windows Server, set a host name, set the time zone, install DHCP, turn it off on pfSense, turn it on Windows Server, test with Windows 10. That's the whole thing. I'm pretty sure I actually pressed the record button. Yes.
Now, you
Yep.
know what happened to the last security guard?
Yeah.
So I do have a question.
All right. Yes.
So this is from last week's. It's kind of Pete and I, we talked about it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll get this in the recording too. Yeah.
So he got everything working, but when he did, when he pinged www.google.com, it wouldn't send a destination. But when he did it the way I did it, which was 8.8.8.8,
Mhm.
he got a destination. Does that still work, or
Sort of.
were we supposed to get one from www.google?
Doing it from a name is better and shows you that more services are up and responding. So what you've done is you've effectively pinged something on the internet. So that definitely works. Your routing actually works, but the name did not. So what service deals with names?
That's a Pete question.
DNS. So in this case, something's wrong with DNS. I don't know what it is, but pfSense is the one that's doing DNS for you. So what you might want to do is turn off DNS, like uncheck it, hit apply, and then turn it back on. Check it and apply.
Because I didn't test it on my VMs, but when he called me and told me I'm not getting a ping with www, I was like, we'll try 8.8.8.
And that worked.
And he's like, okay, that works.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So DNS is not working. So if you can ping an IP but you can't ping a name, DNS is not working, but the internet is available. So the thing with that is that, yeah, you'll need to either restart the DNS service by doing that, disable and then enable again. If that doesn't fix it, in pfSense, this was a few years ago, the resolver didn't like to work in a VM for some reason. But there's two different things that you can do. You can turn off the resolver and enable the forwarder. So there are two services in pfSense. One is the resolver. It is the big, bulky bind9 thing that can do all of the DNS cool stuff. It does everything you want it to do. But for some reason, a few years ago, it broke, and it sounds like it's breaking now as well. So that bug made it back. So you'll disable that, uncheck it, apply it, and then go to services, and underneath resolver, or next to resolver, there'll be DNS forwarder. Go in and turn that one on. You do not have to configure it at all. Turn it on, hit apply, try DNS, give it 10 seconds, try DNS again, and that'll probably work.
Because I told Pete I would ask.
Yeah, Anthony, so that's for you too then. Just set up the forwarder. That way you don't have to do any kind of jankiness, and you can let DHCP do all the heavy lifting. I mean, you can also fix that in DHCP, right? By setting up a custom DNS. I think that's what you're talking about, Anthony. So, I mean, there are ways around this. You can definitely figure this out. But moving forward, we're going to have a DNS server on our network. So,
Because I just didn't know if that's going to affect with any other future project. If
yep,
it is, then
you do not have internet effectively. You can't go anywhere in a browser because everything is name-based. But if whatever you're trying to access is accessible over an IP, well, everything is technically, I guess. But if you're typing in IP addresses, you'll be able to get there. But if you're typing in names, it won't work. Yeah. So make sure to fix that DNS the way I'd mentioned, and you should be golden. All right, cool. Good question. Well, good question by proxy. All right. Well, that'll do it. I'll kill it off here.